The instinctive hatred of reality is the outcome of an extreme susceptibility to pain and to irritation, which can no longer endure to be touched at all, because every sensation strikes too deep. Epicurus was a typical decadent, and I was the first to recognize him as such. The terror of pain, even of infinitely slight pain, such a state cannot possibly help culminating in a religion of love. So, needless to say, there will be repercussions to our usage of the Stellaron in Planarcadia, considering that Terminus literally showed up to warn us of a future that has already happened. As I have stated back in 3.7, we are in a loop, or an eternal recurrence if you will, and thus it is here in Planarcadia that we can finally understand the true meaning of the Elation and the Trailblaze. As Ligas told us like 50 times in Amphoreus, the simulation of Amphoreus is a microcosm of the universe, and since Amphoreus ended up in an eternal recurrence, obviously, the bigger universe is also in an eternal recurrence too, as proven by the mechanism of fully ascension and the black cats walking back in time of Terminus.
これは俺が歩んできた道で、その幾千万の可能性の一つだ。でも、大事なのはそこじゃない。大事なのはそれらの可能性が、姫子が正確にかけた願いから生まれたってこと。そして、そこから導き出される結末は一つ。失敗だけだ。お前にそんな未来を受け入れる覚悟があるのか？はあ、残念。まだ俺の言ってることが理解できないみたいだな。まだ開拓の道を歩んでるお前にもう一度聞こう。そんな未来を受け入れる覚悟があるのか？
私は絶対に受け入れない。
だったらどうすればいいかもう分かってるだろ。今までたくさんの人が同じ決断をしてきたんだから、正確に願うんだ。お前の願いで彼女の願いを上書きすればいい。お前は旅の中でもうそれを見つけただろう。
七死人のみんな、次の駅へ旅立つ時、私たちは誰一人欠けてちゃダメだよ。いつかの約束、誓い、夢、そして絆も。私は何一つ諦めない。
そう来なくちゃな。かつて俺も同じ決断の果てに全てを失った。でも前へ進み続けるには失うことになれるしかない。さあもう一度旅立つんだ、アキビリ。俺たちの旅路はいずれまた交わる。その時はこの手でお前の道を断ち切ってやる。
That Terminus is naturally not a simulation whatsoever, and neither was the 3.8 Terminus, considering that we verified again in 4.0 that that was really Terminus, which acts as a foreshadowing for Terminus showing up in 4.4 back then, and how I instantly knew that Planarcadia was in a loop in 4.0. Of course, in addition to Terminus literally showing us to remind us about the number 8 from Amphoreus, 4.4 also has a world quest where we have to find the missing black cat stuck in the ATM. And when we return the black cat to the camera booth of Fulii and Mythos, we can see a delusion of a scene in the past, and we can even choose to edit the scene too with the power of the almighty Mythos, camera booth. In other words, Aha, Terminus, and Mythos are all active in Planarcadia looping, and everything from 4.1 to 4.4 is the equivalent of patch 2.2 and 2.3 for Penacony, as in it's a fake ending and the literally edited memory of a black cat. In actuality, the game has been much more obvious about it this time compared to Penacony. Back in 4.1, the writers also gave us a lore book, Approaching Science, that basically already told us the entire plot of Mythos is ripples in the Dirac Sea. As in, Mythos is controlling the dark zone of the Ether Sea, which flows from reverse from the future back into the past, and like Cyrene and Amphoreus, Mythos, who appeared as the Fulii at the Garden of Remembrance in gold and gears, is continuously jumping into the sea to change the past, through which they can change the present with the uncertainty principle, through which they can delay Nous Instant and disprove the erudition's Penrose-Lucas argument. As I have mentioned before back in 3.8, the erudition's view of the star rail setting is basically that of the Penrose-Lucas argument. Fundamentally, Nous is the ultimate truth that exists in a different plane of existence than our material reality, and from their higher dimensional existence, they can determine everything in the universe with the objective truth, the math of the equilibrium. Literally, in Herta's Myriad, you can see that Nous literally views the universe as math, and while Herta condemned Nous as paying no heed to the universe back then, you can clearly see in the freeze frame that the entire time, Nous has been analyzing the structure of the Penrose staircase of the universe, or in Hawking's words, the grand design of M-theory. After all, it's not a coincidence that Ligas kept citing Hawking, and Polka wears a rose in her clothes. Literally, Xander and Polka are most likely based on Hawking and Penrose respectively. In other words, like Ligas for Amphoreus, Nous is aware of the eternal recurrence and is actively manipulating it with the power of math, which was how they anchored the instant in the first place and how Polka orchestrated her murders. Hence, Nous is at the same location as the cast iron throne that controls the equilibrium, and to get to Nous place you have to view the solitary wave and look down from a higher world, from which the solitary wave is now but a knowledge singularity.
Step out of the circle at your feet and look down from a higher world. In an extrapolation concerning the universe, I rolled a die.
Of course, in the first place, the Penrose-Lucas argument was built on Gödel's Incompleteness theorem, which correlates to the Enigmata and the Finality here against the erudition's Penrose-Lucas argument. In overly simplified terms, Gödel's Incompleteness theorem states that a system cannot prove its completeness by itself, like how people usually can't pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. A result of this is that to prove that a system is complete, you have to switch your perspective to a system at a higher level of hierarchy, or to look down from a higher world, in Patavia and Herta's wordings. Of course, a natural result of this is that the higher level system is also susceptible to the incompleteness theory, which means that we have to go to an even higher hierarchy to prove the second system's completeness. Repeat this ad infinitum and we get a Tarski truth hierarchy, or a stairway to heaven if you will. In Gödel, Escher, Bach, and in Hoyo world building, it's a Penrose staircase instead, in which to pull yourself from the bootstrap, you have to stand on a higher level of the staircase, until it's all a line of yourself pulling yourself by your bootstraps all the way across the entire length of the paradox staircase. The only difference between the Fate Magicians and Star Rail Pathstriders is whether you pull yourself up or pull yourself down to get to the origin, which is what this lore drop in the Fate collab is all about. Since it is a Penrose staircase, up is down and down is up, and you can even say that it's a paradox spiral. Thus, for the Enigmata and the Finality, the Hoyo writers have chosen the Penrose staircase to represent these two paths, mostly because the Enigmata is that exact oil on the staircase, or train track, of the Finality. In Douglas Hofstadter's argument in Gödel, Escher, Bach, the multiple layers of dreams and reality constitute a strange loop of the Penrose staircase, and Escher's waterfall, or a castle in the air. By the way, Star Rail isn't the only game where Hoyo uses this interpretation of the incompleteness theorem for the finality and the eternal recurrence. In Genshin, the castle in the air was used as the inspiration for the jail of Koitar and the moon card that Columbina drew before Dator stole the moon marrows, which connects the castle to Koitar, Columbina, and Dator. In Honkai 3, Escher's waterfall was directly cited as the mechanism of the Honkai in Mars, and the description of that mechanism is identical to the Ether Sea in Star Rail, because the Ether Sea is also the Sea of Quanta. In Project Moongazer, Bernays' 1939 proof to Gödel's incompleteness theorem was also directly cited by the minigame that will only unlock after you finish leveling the Norse Stone Circle. This minigame is actually used to tell us that Teyvat is also in a loop, as the most optimal path for the dragon is also a circle. Albeit it's a finite loop because the snake will run into its own tail eventually, proving the incompleteness of the loop and the system on Teyvat. Durant's sword actually already told us this, but it's nice to get confirmation directly in a world quest. For the Penrose staircase, it became the design of the castle where Senedina and Entropy were separated and the entire Mars plot was foiled. And in Genshin, the Penrose staircase also appeared in Sandrone's notebook, the design of the world formula, and heavily contributed to the Temple of Space design, and Escher himself is an NPC who escaped from the Temple of Space, starting the quest. Notably, Escher's identity was taken up by Tor in the past to scam Skara, and Tor brought up the dream argument in the Nod Cry main quest.
降臨者よ、世界を見せてやろう。座る、寝る。これは最も一般的な行為だ。なぜ人はその枠にとらわれ続けるのか。歩く代わりに飛んではいけないと誰が決めた？お前の能力や経験からすれば、天理の下に生死時空を司る四大失性が存在することをすでに知っているだろう。刃物で傷つけられた者は失血や感染で死に至り、湖に落ちた者はもがき苦しみながら溺れ、追いゆく者は孤独となり、孤独な者は老いてゆく。そして新たな命が生まれ、同じく苦難の道を歩み始めるのだ。この4つの事象が世界を形作り、人間を束縛する。だがあの者たちはその枠を超え、天より授かった権能を自在に操っている。人は公平を望むが、この世に公平などはあるだろうか。神が地にひれ伏し、生きとし生ける者のしもべであると認めない限り、公平など花から存在し得ない。ルールを定めたのは誰か。我々を束縛する権利を持つのは一体誰なのか。モラルが高すぎるのか、それとも現実に期待を寄せすぎているのか。一つ質問をしよう。もし生まれた瞬間から夢の中にいて、苦しみを知らずに過ごした者がいたとしたら、その人にとって夢と現実、どちらが幸せだろうか。
そんなの詭弁だよ。あなたのしたこととは何の関係もない。
予想通りだな。お前はまだここの本質を分かっていないようだ。
Obviously, someone who has dreamt their entire life won't be able to distinguish what is reality and what is dream. Ergo, we, as people existing in the system called reality, cannot prove our own completeness from inside the system, and we can't really prove that our reality is not a dream, and in Hoya's case, usually this means that there's a loop involved. This is called the dream argument of Descartes, but in the East, similar arguments have been made thousands of years before Descartes. The Taoist butterfly dream, which features heavily in all Honkai titles and Genshin world building, and the Buddhist concept of Maya, which appeared as part of Nahida's kit, have pretty much argued the same thing. Another name for the dream argument is brain in a vat, which is a path mechanic of the erudition equation in the aptly named simulated universe, and of course, the fried version of that brain in a vat is the jellyfish on the staircase of the Enigmata. That is to say, because a brain in a vat is inherently unable to tell if it's in a dream or reality as long as it's still stuck inside the system. As far as the brain is concerned, reality might as well be the butterfly dream of a cute anime girl who is the manifestation of the swirl of the root, or the great dream of a sleeping and ignorant creator god named Fans, or a butterfly dream of a raccoon continuously running on the hamster wheel in its sleep. In other words, the Penrose staircase and all the Escher references are to denote not only the edited memories of the Enigmata, but also the incompleteness theorem of the Finality, as the eternal recurring dream in the dream argument. In the example of Amphoreus, this strange loop is expressed through Anaxagoras and Ligus in their respective caves. For Anaxagoras, because he is a simulation in a machine, he was unable to figure out the eternal recurrence of their own generation and could only figure out the generational samsara between the Titan generations, which probably netted him the moniker Anaxa the Foolish in the first Amphoreus trailer from the writers. Although I have to say that it's rather funny that some players still can't distinguish between the eternal recurrence and the generational samsara, believing that Anaxa actually figured out the eternal recurrence even though Ligus dissed him like twice for that in 3.4, and they spelled it out plainly and as I have written.
Just kidding. What I mean to say is that time, space, matter, all concepts exist solely because we perceive them. This is called the erudition. Without it, the universe would merely be a chaotic book written by chance yet unread by anyone. As your acquaintance, Lord Anaxagoras, suggested, everything Amphoreus exists through new spores, living in the memories of those yet to come. Oh, how beautifully it aligns, revealing universal truths in such simple terms. Only he could solve the riddle of what exactly are we? Oh, but you'll remember, even as the embodiment of reason, one mystery remained beyond his grasp.
If that is the case, whose memories did the very first new spore sprout from?
Exactly. The Titans are Chrysos heirs of the past, and Chrysos heirs are the Titans of the future. Anaxagoras' theory of Era Nova holds true. As the model of reason, he reached unprecedented heights. But from just the perspective of a player in the drama, he could never fully uncover the last layer of truth. The cycles of the hero's journey that have played out until now were never about creating a new world or perfect heroes and gods. They were a deep learning program made for the Black Tide.
Anaxagoras the Foolish has enough knowledge to refute faith and to stir up a torrent capable of slaying gods.
Anyway, speaking of Ligus, do you know who else was a foolish man stuck in a cave because he wasn't aware he was in a loop? That's right, it's Ligus himself, who only realized that outside of the cave, there was a bigger cave after the event of 3.7. Another funny story, back in 3.7, when I released the Terminus video, a bunch of people were still insisting that there isn't an eternal recurrence outside of Amphoreus and the Terminus 3.8 was a dream. Never mind that Ligus repeated like 50 times that Amphoreus was a microcosm of the universe and the Finality lore has been in the game since year one.
Look upon the courtesan's extravagance, the mariner's intemperance. Listen to the infant in the mirror, the waves as they enter the dream, the tipping of the balance, the shapeless prince.
Of course, it was in 3.7 that Ligus figured out the bigger cave too. With new data from the Demiurge, it became crystal clear that outside of Amphoreus, the universe in Honkai Star Rail is also in an eternal recurrence of its own, which Ligus couldn't figure out because he was the Anaxagoras of the bigger universe, and most notably not an Aeon. Naturally, the Aeon on the higher level of existence that can figure out the strange loop is Nous, whose Penrose-Lucas analysis of the Penrose staircase you can see very clearly in Myriad. In simplified terms, the Penrose-Lucas argument is pretty much that you can bypass the incompleteness theorem with math and the human mind the same way physicists generally believe that there is an M theory of everything that decodes the laws of the entire universe. So nous is obviously that exact argument made real specifically to eliminate all the unknown. Of course, one argument on the Penrose-Lucas camp is that since the incompleteness theorem itself can be proven with math calculated by the human minds, it means that math calculated by the human minds can bypass the incompleteness theorem, mostly because we are not machines, unlike Ligas and all the people infected by the anti-organic equation. But at the same time, if there is an M theory, or a grand design of everything, it means that, technically speaking, there is also no free will, and Nous circle of knowledge can be viewed as a shackles binding the prisoners to the cave. As a result, Iron Tomb could not actually destroy the cave with the remembrance and the Finality's time loop in action, and much like Anaxa, who was unable to deduce himself out of the cave after 33 billion loops, neither could Cyrene nor Phainon manage to find a way out of the eternal recurrence they set up by themselves, and in the end, they had to rely on another version of themselves from a higher world to break free of the cave. Us the Trailblaze. As the Penrose staircase appeared behind Phainon in 3.4 when Nanook appeared, and Phainon broke the fourth wall of Amphoreus, which was after we stepped in as the hero of the journey for Phainon to try that whole ascension thing again. Although, on the flip side, a related consequence to Gödel's incompleteness theorem is the Chaitin's incompleteness theorem and Chaitin constant, which was cited by Ligas in 3.5, and I made a video about it back in 3.8. While the constant Ligas was talking about is the cosmological constant determining the past and the future of the universe in physics, the exact value that Ligas was trying to drag it toward with the anti-organic equation is the Chaitin constant. In short, for a Turing machine that can calculate everything, eventually, it will hit a number that crashes itself, which was why Ligas called it the fall of erudition. Literally, he was trying to manipulate the cosmological constant with the anti-organic equation to activate the incompleteness theorem and crash Nous, who is the ionic realization of the Penrose-Lucas argument to bypass the exact same incompleteness theorem itself. Effectively, the Hoyo writers have mashed up the physics constant with the math constant together for this plot. In real life, despite believing in an objective plane of mathematical truth that influences reality, Penrose actually also supports free will because he believes that consciousness is an effect of quantum mechanics. So fundamentally, he's also like Ligas and Polka, which makes sense because Ligas was based on Hawking and Polka was based on Penrose himself. Incidentally, Hofstadter, the author of Gödel, Escher, Bach, and his strange loop was also referenced by Arthur Charles Clarke's Space Odyssey series, which obviously went on to inspire Star Rail. This game's world building is hella wild, I tell you. Even though I already guessed the eternal recurrence plot twist of Amphoreus way back in 3.2, Ligas still took me by blindside with that lore dropback in 3.5. Legitimately the coolest character in Amphoreus, with no competition. And of course, because Terminus showed up for real in the main quest for Planarcadia to yap to us about number 8 as a loop, there is definitely another loop here in Planarcadia. I have guessed this back in 4.0, and details some of the discrepancies signifying edited memories in 4.3. In 4.4, quite a few hints as to what happened in the other loops were also added in addition to the elephant in the room, that is Terminus. So according to Terminus, the danger is actually not over yet, and Himeko was supposed to die for real during the Asat boss fight when she makes a wish to the Stellaron. However, in this timeline, because we made the wish instead of Himeko, she survived. For now, because the danger zone is actually 8 days. In addition, Himeko's trailer about the end being the same as the beginning also suggests a loop, which aligns with the original Himeko story. So if a personal loop also exists for Himeko, it means that Motoko is actually a Himeko from the future sent back into the past and pretended to be an imaginee in front of young Himeko, which as you can tell, is the exact same plot for us and the other us as the Trailblaze and the Finality.
看来列车又一次选择了错误的航线。但这也无可奈何啊。在光阴中， 就算能将因与果分隔良久，但二者终将发生可怕的重逢。
你听过这样的问题吧？如果有机会让世界科技进步100年，却要牺牲一只小猫咪？哇哦，很冷酷嘛！恭喜你，你和这个世界选择了一样的回答。
Naturally, Terminus' claim about Himiko's death in their timelines is backed up by Sparkle, whose black cat analogy is rather clearly about us and Himeko now. While I don't think Himeko will actually die in 8 days in our timeline, I do think that since we use the Stellaron, it will be us who die in 8 days this time, which would cause Himeko to use the Stellaron in the next timeline, which would cause us to use the Stellaron in the timeline after that, creating an infinity loop between 2 different timelines. In effect, which cat who dies depends on which box you open, and us and Himeko are 2 different cats in 2 different boxes. Well, it's either that or Himeko actually dies in 8 days, but I do think that's a bit too premature from a Doylist perspective for Himeko's character development at the moment. If I were Mr. Roasted Chicken, I would personally leave her death to Planarcadia Finality mission next year. But speaking of Catbox, even though the storytelling of 4.4 was on the subtle side regarding Asat Pramad's motivation, his materials actually spilled the beans rather cleanly. The fools who lost their smile tirelessly play games with civilization, for without challengers there is no elation, not for others, and certainly not for themselves. Yesterday withered, heroes died, and the evil villain traversed the stars, unleashing malice upon all. Yet there is still a yearning for someone to defeat the great villain, and take the rewards prepared since the very beginning. Successors of Inequality, splendidly done. In other words, it is as I have suspected back in 4.3, his true goal from the beginning is to make us use the Stellaron and turn it into a loop where Himeko is alive, a final golden rose to his not actually daughter. Functionally, he's identical to Phainon in 3.4, and the entire boss fight is actually Asat Pramad making himself a scapegoat to ensure that we and Himeko, as the successors of Inequality, would survive this phantasmon where she was supposed to die for real in Terminus timelines. Of course, Asat Pramad himself still has some secrets too, and he will return as a boss later down the line. Specifically, Asat Pramad told Himeko that he was infected with the Weathering Curse too.
風化の呪いだ。宇宙は狂っている。不条理そのものだ。俺は幾度となく生き延びたが、体はかつてのグラフィエのようにボロボロになってしまった。これが反抗する者に奴が与える責め苦なのかはわからない。だが、気づいた時には、もう手遅れだった。
Since Asat Pramad doesn't lie to Himeko except for his introduction, this means that he also betrayed the destruction and is paying the price for it. Unless we can find someone to swap history with him the same way Motoko did with the help of the Shadow of the Moon, Asat Pramad will succumb to the destruction for real and implode. That said, that part of the plot has to wait for after the Amphoreus continuation, because Asat also claims that he first met us in Amphoreus. Looking at his coloring and theme, I think it's rather easy to guess that he was actually Zagreus, who somehow survived through 3.3 into 3.4 and 3.5 after faking his own death multiple times. Zagreus is, of course, purple, and his head is also separated from his body exactly like Asat Pramad. He also knew of the outside world while standing at the Demiurge Matrix, where he was not supposed to have shown up. The same place also had a giant floating Zagreus telling us about the portal configuration theory, which itself is a hint about how Noose Instant is a chain of events instead of a single event, something that is confirmed by Herta only to Cyrene in the main quest. As in, not even us know about that canonically, but this supposed simulation of the Elation does. And another Zagreus in the Matrix told us that they have stolen and edited our memories. Furthermore, in the Eternal page, Zagreus talked about the Eons and about how regrets are the proof that we ever love. That Zagreus also said he had further secrets and he would also meet us again, which he did in Planarcadia, as Asat Pramad. Incidentally, Cypher and Zagreus also stole the moon of Castores, much like how Aha stole something of Rubert and turned it into a moon in Planarcadia. If you track down Zagreus's trace in the history of Amphoreus, you can find another character that sounds suspiciously like the King Midas reference for Asat Pramad in Himeko trailer. Historically, before Aglia and Cypher's generation of heirs took over the political scene of Amphoreus, there was a King Mikas who cheated Thanatos for immortality, only that it was the draconic Thanatos tricking him by taking half of his soul, and his immortality and sanity was the punishment. So it's basically the exact same plot as En Route, who was swallowed by the draconic Oroboros and tricked the aftertaste out of them, only for him to end up in the imaginary river anyway and get infected with the Weathering Curse, the bigger universe's equivalence of the Golden Blood Flaw. In some versions of the King Midas myth, King Midas jumped into a river in an attempt to wash away his curse, only for him to turn the entire river to gold. In short, the more you look closely at Zagreus' history, the more similarities you start to see between Zagreus and Asat Pramad, and only a complete fool of Asat Pramad's caliber would jump into a simulation just to experience his own life and repeat the exact same mistake again for 33 billion more times. Anyway, whether us or Himeko use the Stellaron, there would always be many repercussions down the line, some of which we can already guess from the clues Terminus and the characters gave us. Art is the grand deception. The inequality of the soul remains unsolved. This quote is what you can get after completing the Floating Grease mini-games this patch, handed to us by possibly Asat Pramad or Nihilux in disguise. So needless to say, the equilibrium has not been reached yet, and Asat Pramad's boss fight is literally a red herring. The Floating Grease Chronicles might give the Arcadia we see a whole new meaning, one entirely different from the public consensus. Firstly, Oroboros' husk in Planarcadia will be back in 8 days, and Clippeth will strike in response. This is further strengthened by Kuchiba's role in the Fate collab, in which Gilgamesh specifically called her out as hiding secrets of her own. More than that, she actually has the same Japanese voice actor as Kingu and Enkidu from the Fate franchise, a fact that the Hoyo writers played with in the Fate collab itself when they let Kuchiba be the only one who drank the wine cup on screen during the King's Banquet, and she also narrated the last part of Gilgamesh's journey in Planarcadia. Specifically, the King Banquet scene is a two-folded references, firstly to the banquet scene in Fate Zero between Saber, Iskandar, and Gilgamesh himself. Hoyo just replaced Iskandar with Phainon and restored Saber's honor by having Rin supporting the two British's choice here. That Zero scene was rather hard on Saber and has always been a bit of a flashpoint online between Zero fans and Stay Night fans. But more than that, the second layer of reference is to Babylonia, where Gilgamesh offered Kingu the Grail to maintain his existence. In Babylonia, Kingu was a rebooted version of Enkidu, so to speak, and his mother, the draconic Tiamat, only wanted to use him for her plan of destroying humanity. Since Kingu only had the hardware and not the software of Enkidu, he felt no issue with pretending to be the main cast's guide until Gilgamesh showed up and unmasked him. What Kingu actually did secretly have issue with is no longer being Gilgamesh's friend, because he was technically not Enkidu anymore. In the end, after Gilgamesh gave him the Grail, he started to have some really gay flashbacks of Enkidu's memories of Gilgamesh. So with the power of the gay flashbacks and Enkidu's desire to be Gilgamesh's friend, Kingu decided to make the same choice as Enkidu and sacrifice his life to hold back Tiamat, preserving the end of childhood for humanity and the meaning of Gilgamesh's hero journey. So basically, this scene here is actually also a reference to Gilgamesh offering Kingu the Grail, and it's also a big nod to the Elation's cup, the aftertaste that was stolen from Oroboros by the Elation. I personally think Kuchiba will switch side like Kingu did and support us by the end of it against the bigger crisis looming on the horizon. Considering the deliberate reference, it's unlikely to be a coincidence that Kuchiba talked about finding the meaning of her own journey in the hidden ending of the Fate collab.
神に作られ、人に織りなされ、土に帰ってゆく。求めし者は与えられる。ここに今回の聖杯戦争に関わったすべての者の結末を記し、この事件の陳述の締めくくりとする。けれど一つの物語の終わりに、あらゆる物質的な均衡の果てに、無から生まれたもの、 私の場合それは一体何なのか。旅路はまだ続いているし、最後の答えを導き出すにはきっとまだ早いけど、その日が来るのを心の底から待ち望んでいる。生まれて初めて、これまでにないほど待ち望んでいるの。
色彩还原96.2%，笔触还原93.6%。结论，在物理层面，我的临摹已达到鉴定临界值，这幅赝作足以被判定为真迹。
可你似乎仍不满意，告诉我，你在为什么烦恼？那不到4%的误差，还是数字外的生物。
Speaking of the bigger crisis, it was not only Kuchiba who is the missing moon of the Oroboros. The Great Wave off Kanagawa in 4.0 has always had 2 moons, and it's rather clear by now that the other moon, or Pearl, is Pearl inside the IPC's rank. In the first place, the IPC has always been here to bait the Oroboros, and hidden in the Preservation's divination has always been a dragon of the Finality. As I have said back in 4.0, while Yao Gong interpreted the Finality dragons to be Blade and Dan Heng, in the scenario where those two didn't become the Finality dragons, the third possibility will realize, and it's the same hidden dragon in the IPC's hexagram. As in, the Finality here doesn't necessarily mean the Stellaron hunters and the Trailblaze. It could also literally mean a universal ending and Terminus the Finality showing up. In those loops where Oroboros succeeds, the Veracity would likely devour the Trailblaze and replace the Remembrance Trailblaze union established in 3.7 as the fourth Finality. In addition, the Oroboros rising up in Planarcadia in a previous loop is likely connected to the timeline of that future Silver Wolf in her myriad. That Silver Wolf has abandoned her physical body to become a digital ghost in the Dark Zone, because you literally can't stay for long in the Dark Zone of the Ether Sea without becoming a mimetic entity. According to the record back in Penacony, apparently, a bunch of jellyfish would show up to melt your brain. In the trailer, you can also see that her body can be deconstructed into multiple parts digitally, and she also has very clear draconic features. And in the Aventurin event, there was also a joke about Ghost in the Shell, and that was definitely a jab at both the hacker and the future Silver Wolf. So in other words, she probably got swallowed by the Oroboros and ended up in their stomach, which was actually a gate to the Red Sea, or the Ether Sea currently under the control of the Enigmata. The odd sounds, where is Fuli? As the delicate and intermittent sounds are drowned out by the sound of waves, you find yourself in the middle of the ocean. It is a sea of red. Yes, it's red. Under the scarlet sun, the ocean turns red. A beautiful and alluring singing voice comes from the choppy waves toward you. It is the Aeon's bait to lure you into a trap. The fanged and tentacled neck is as massive as the mountain and the sea, and its writhing flesh threatens to devour you. You know the flickering purple flames are not the antidote that can alleviate your anxiety, but you can't help being drawn to the gentle singing voice. The Aeon is an outright brutal leviathan. It isn't a charming lover as powerful as the waves. You must resist the voice, but you just can't help it. You can't help hoping to be eaten by them. The Aeon of Veracity. To be honest, everyone thought they were just a clumsy leviathan, like how Clippeth was thought to be an oversized statue. Who would have guessed that their body has multiple forms? I suspect that there is a dimension unknown to humanity under the dark tides that gave birth to them. Oh, and their abdomen. It is said that no species can resist the lantern-like bait on Oroboros' body, and that countless galaxies are already in their stomach, with only the memories of those that perished being left behind thanks to Fuli, but technically speaking, the approaching science book said it's mythos. But Oroboros isn't the only one rising in that particular recurrence. During the main quest, Sunday suspiciously asked us to weave them a happy dream, and then he made a jab at himself for repeating past mistakes.
何か言葉をかけてあげることはできないでしょうか。たとえいつか目が覚めるものだとしても、たとえ触れたら壊れてしまうと分かっていても、たとえそれが偽りであると痛いほど理解していても、 私はこの瞬間彼らのために夢を紡いであげたいのです。これは同じ過ちを繰り返そうとしているだけなのでしょうか。滑稽だと笑いますか。
Free yourself from the shackles. You can always start anew. My song will no longer carry any undertones from the harmonic strings.
Let every screen shine with dreams, and every show ignite the heart.
So yeah, the outcome we saw in 4.4 is a happy dream, exactly like how 2.2 and 2.3 were the happy dreams for the Penacony loops. In the other recurrence of Planarcadia, we can be reasonably certain that Aina actually did rise up from within Shipe, which means that someone actually undid Shipe to separate the three faces again, which brings us to the other elephant in the room, the divine child to be born in 8 days. Throughout Planarcadia, we were led to believe that this divine child, the one whose first cry caused Aha to laugh, is Aha themselves. However, by now, I strongly suspect Aha to be a literal red herring because the Fate collab, the incoming Amphoreus continuation, and the missing Kafka cutscene led me to believe that the divine child is actually an open slot for an Ionic ascension, currently stuck in a three-way tug-of-war between Tazi, Phainon, and the Beauty. During the flashing cutscene of the first Asat Pramad boss fight, we were shown two images that haven't happened so far in this recurrence. One with us killing Kafka, and the second one is Nihilux leading us into a TV room. For Nihilux's scene, it's a clear-cut parallel to Ishtar's plot in the Fate collab, which I will discuss later. But for the first scene, which is actually also related to the Nihilux scene, Silver Wolf, Blade, and Firefly are all assumed dead, probably under Kafka's hand. At the start of Planarcadia, we were told that Kafka recently stole a mirror of the Beauty, and since she herself has had a connection with the Beauty since the start of the game through Franz Kafka's metamorphosis, it means that the Beauty plot is coming up next. From the Fate collab, we know that the throne for Beauty is currently open, and Ishtar wanted to ascend to the Beauty throne by stealing all the power of the Elation gathered through this Phantasmon game. In other words, we can reasonably assume that one possible answer for the divine child is the missing Beauty, and somebody in the Planarcadia cast also has a similar plot to Ishtar. As in, they want to steal the energy gathered by the Elation to ascend to the Beauty's throne instead of feeding it all to Oroboros like previous game cycles. With all the fiasco that Asat Pramad has thrown the current game into and Oroboros' imminent rise, this game is actually the perfect opportunity for the Mask Thief.
母が現れたの？いいえ、ソは私たちの呼びかけに応じなかった。今回の幻月遊戯に勝者はいなかったの。けど月の裏側から顔を出す影が見えたわ。その影はこう言った。ごめんね、私は優越じゃないから、ソに代わって君にご褒美をあげることはできないんだ。でも血が流れるばかりで奇跡の一つもない幻月遊戯なんて、そんなの誰も求めてないでしょ。だから今まで蓄えてきた力を使って君の願いを一つだけ叶えてあげる。もちろん私にも限界はあるから何でも思い通りにできるってわけじゃないけど、まあちょっとした手助けくらいならできるんじゃないかな。
今さら気づいたところでもう手遅れ。私の儀式はもうすでにこの二層楽園全体に及んでるの。その気になればいつだってこの地に満ちる眼力すべてを私のものにできる。けど残念ね。準備か優越か、あるいは新たに遠坂の運命を切り開いてみるとか、そこのところまだ決めかねてるのよね。
Naturally, since one possibility of the divine child is the Beauty, it means that Tazi is also in the game as a possible candidate for the divine child. As I have analyzed back in 3.7, through Franz Kafka's metamorphosis, the Propagation and the Beauty are effectively the pair of brother and sister in the work. As the brother woke up as a bug at the start of the story, the sister would also parallel her brother and woke up as a beauty at the end of the story. In addition, considering that Tazi and Oroboros are archenemies in the law of equilibrium, Oroboros' imminent rise also means that the scale of the equilibrium should also be leaning toward the rise of a new Tazi, and if this is true, it would explain why Aina would also rise and respond, probably to hold back Tazi again. Lastly, there are also a bunch of bug paintings in the memory space Asat created. Actually, those bug decorations are identical to those on Penacony, and the ones on Penacony were what allowed me to predict back in 2.0 that there were actual bugs on Penacony, even before the Fate Collab Part 1 spelled it out. In other words, in terms of literature reference, the game lore's internal rule of equilibrium and world map design, it's actually showing every sign that Tazi is a possible result of the Divine Child. And as I have explained before in 3.7, Kafka and Firefly are positioned as the old and young versions of Miss Saeki from Kafka on the Shore. We would always have to choose between the two of them. One would become Tazi, and the other would become the beauty. In 3.8, we chose to only give Firefly the bouquet and not head to the same finality as her, so it means that in the 4.4 timeline, she was primed to become Tazi. However, in that loop shown to us, I suspect that the situation was reversed, and we likely chose to save Firefly in that loop, which led to Kafka losing control and turning to Tazi, which led to her killing everyone else, and us killing her. Hence, this is what Kafka means by us changing her destiny, literally. Our choice will literally change how she dies, whether as herself the beauty or as the bug in the metamorphosis. That said, in addition to Kafka and her two possibilities of becoming Tazi or the beauty, there are actually two other candidates for the Divine Child. Since the Amphoreus continuation is coming soon with Nihilux banner, I think it's easy to guess that the other two candidates for the Divine Child are Phainon and Nihilux. For Phainon, he has always had a Durin-style magnum opus plot with Nanook, as in terms of mythology, he is the Divine Child Plutos of Demeter, and also the Divine Child of the Minoan goddess Eileithyia, and also the Divine Child Damu of his mother Dutter and his sister Jeshtanana. Well, technically speaking, Hoyo can also do an Uno reverse card and let Cyrene be the Divine Child while Phainon is stuck in the past this time. The whole explanation and mythological connection is rather long because I had to explain the actual historical connection between Mesopotamia and ancient Greek, so if you want the full analysis, it's in this video back in 3.5. The gist of it is that Phainon is the male divine child of the mother goddess Demeter as Cyrene, and they are also the brother to the pair of brother and sister theme that's literally everywhere in Star Rail. As a result, between Phainon and Cyrene, one of them has to stay behind in the underworld, and the other one has to leave. Since last year's cooking event, it's been heavily hinted that Phainon will have to leave Amphoreus behind in an exile, and the Fate Collab Banquet scene reinforces that once again. So in other words, there's a good chance that the Divine Child could come from Amphoreus, and it's either Cyrene or Phainon getting actually born. I'm leaning more toward Phainon due to the magnum opus plot with Nanook, but technically, it could be Cyrene too. But of course, the issue with Cyrene's ascension is that she would become Fuli, who would likely continue to block off the beauty from the game. In 3.7, I have theorized that the beauty, the enigmata, and the remembrance are all different crystal fragments of the same aeon, and which path actually gets activated depends on which pure child ascends in recurrence. In our current loop, because Cyrene has been hogging the Fuli slot until 3.7, the beauty was effectively locked behind a mirror by Fuli, as that simulated universe occurrence has told us since year 1. Now, however, since Cyrene is unlikely to ascend as of 4.4, Amphoreus continuation notwithstanding, it means that both the beauty and the enigmata can rise up to replace the remembrance as the new Fuli. Naturally, taking advantage of that is Ishtar in the Fate Collab and her main quest equivalents, Nihilux. Since year 1, we have known that the Fuli in the garden is not the real remembrance aeon, but has always been Mythos of the enigmata pretending to be the remembrance. From Gold and Gears, we have also tracked down that Mythos's traces to learn a few things about her. She is a woman with long hair sleeping on the cast iron throne, and Owain thought that she was long dead. However, she also woke up to battle against him when he got close to the throne, so she is both dead and alive at the same time. In addition, when Rupert was killed by Polka, she was the one who sounded the chime, exactly like how Cyrene walked back in time as Fuli by sounding the chime in Amphoreus. This means that Mythos is also likely a pure child with the capacity to walk back in time, just that she has rebelled against the Remembrance and is actively using the Remembrance's reputation to spread Mythos uncertainty. Moreover, she also had a history with the IPC and used to work with them for the memory bubble tech until Louis Fleming was kicked out of the IPC leadership by Dongfang Qixing. In Louis Fleming's retirement speech and his last appearance in historical record, a Fuli appeared before him, but that was actually Mythos. As far as their motive is concerned, they have been working with the Elation since Gold and Gears to meddle against Noose Instance and the anti-organic equation, but they have largely been a girl failure with the Elation, and all of Noose Instance have come true so far, as if no one has ever meddled with them. Lastly, Mythos is also the true culprit responsible for the destruction of Acheron's homeworld, presumably to specifically create Acheron as an emanato of Nihility and kill whoever was the origin there. In 3.5, she sent a series of memo keepers to Amphoreus, presumably to kill Cyrene and supplant her role of Fuli, but she failed again and complained about it in 4.1. All in all, I have been calling her with the nickname White Swan since 2.0 to juxtaposition her against Black Swan, because if there's a Black Swan, there is definitely a White Swan somewhere. This is a quick summary of what we have known of Mythos before Planarcadia, and recently, Asat Pramad and Mythos themselves have given us a lot of clues as to who and what the path of Enigmata really is. A hungry ghost. Literally, Mythos and that entire path is a ghost.
Fast forward to 2146 AE. A massive text exodus occurred at the same time across every star system. Tech, history, the words ran right off the pages and screens, including every last record on the Eden of Blessed Insight. So who was this killer? No victor, a cremator, riddler, or pure child of a Nasraba?
In 4.1, I have pointed out how the winner of that particular game likely became Mythos as a result of that game, using the exact method that Ishtar wanted to use to ascend to the throne of beauty in the Fate collab. So yeah, Ishtar is actually standing in for Nihilux, and Nihilux is technically a facet of Aha, and also Mythos at the same time. And if you really think about it, Aha's rule has always been 1 minute of godhood, not only one wish during godhood. Historically, a past winner of the game even made a list of all the things they wished for in 1 minute. So logically, if the winner of the game is a pure child capable of always walking back in time, to the exact moment when they had that 1 minute of godhood, then technically speaking, that pure child could leech off the Elation to hijack the Remembrance and create their own path out of fiction, even if they themselves hadn't ascended into Fuli, as long as the pure child still have the page for it. Incidentally, Dolly, who has been frozen and continuously using her memories for something for a really long time, has been repeatedly name-dropped by the main quest and the lore books. This means that Dolly has been walking back into the past continuously like Cyrene and her status as the ripples in the Dirac Sea. Of course, Asat Pramad was helpful enough to tell us of a seemingly unrelated incident with a history fictionologist with the train.
開拓のアイオンが没した後、その追随者たちは次々に去ったと言われている。かつては巨大だった列車組も残っていたのは一人のナビゲーターと一人の七死人だけだった。ある日、虚構歴史学者が列車に紛れ込み、こっそり高校日誌を書き換えたことがあった。だが次の日、彼は驚くことになる。日誌の内容が元通りになっていたんだ。マントを羽織ったナビゲーターがそこに座り、退屈そうに記録をめくっていた。どうやったんだと虚構歴史学者は尋ねた。一人一人名前を覚えてるからなとナビゲーターは言った。それから全ての星の座標と全ての流星の軌跡も。
ペガーナの遺産か。この資料はアキビリと一緒に消えたもんだと思ってたが、どうやら手癖の悪いやつが余計なことをしてくれたようだ。
星を開く者を恐れてるの？
その名前、姫子がつけたのか？
ドリコのユーモアよりセンスが絶望的だな。
So, yeah, the log change was actually a distraction, and what the history fictionologist actually wanted to do was to leave the blueprint for Himeko. This would fit with the timeline too, because IZ already told us that there was no one else alive on the train by then, so there was literally no one else who could leave the blueprint aside from Asat Pramad himself and the fictionologist. And since Asat Pramad didn't know about it until 15 years ago, when Himeko restarted the train, it means that it wasn't him. The culprit was the history fictionologist. Or to be more precise, Dolly, the past navigator who left the train to become a chunk of crystals after Akivali fell, or at least, the hungry ghost of her lost in the Ether Sea. In the Fate collab, when we made a joke about the true nature of the Elation's power set as Quantum Entanglement, and what the Elation does is basically to mess around with the probability of the cat box's wave function, so that the consciousnesses in the dark zone would manifest in reality. Even though it was a joke, it actually aligns with existing in-game theories about the Elation's power set, and also the reflection of the moon confirms it directly in a hidden interaction. So yeah, the quantum entanglement theory is real, and jokes are the deepest lore. Of course, considering that the dark zone is actually under the control of Mythos, I am reasonably certain that would make Mythos into the second demonic moon mentioned by the Raccoon game in 4.4. In other words, what Pearl suspected in 4.0 is correct, and ether editing involves both the Elation and the Enigmata. Naturally, because Mythos, a literal flower in the mirror of the remembrance, is the second demonic moon mentioned by the reflection of the moon, obviously also in the water. And do you remember who actually fulfilled Motoko's wish?
残念だけど、アッハに謁見したのは私じゃないわ。あんたが欲しがってた答えは最初からなかったのよ。私に贈り物を渡してくれた時、そうはこう言ったの。
遅くなったね。埋め合わせだと思って受け取って。
アッハが現れたの？いいえ。そうは私たちの呼びかけに応じなかった。今回の幻月遊戯に勝者はいなかったの。けど月の裏側から顔を出す影が見えたわ。その影はこう言った。ごめんね。私は優越じゃないから、ソに代わって君にご褒美をあげることはできないんだ。
You can see here that there's a deliberate misdirection going on when Himeko told the story to Asat Pramad. She told him that Motoko told her that the one who granted her wish was Aha themselves, which would be technically true because Mythos is hijacking Aha's authority as a face of Aha all along. But at the same time, it's not the full truth the same way 4.3 tried to bait us into believing that our Himeko was fake because Asat said so. Later on in the main quest, when we could actually see Himeko's memories of the event, it turns out that Motoko didn't hear that shadow of the moon claiming to be Aha at all. In fact, they claimed to be not Aha and could only gather a small portion of Aha's power. As a result, what they did was not to cure the weathering curse at all, but to swap the destinies of Himeko and Motoko. In other words, what was swapped was the histories of Himeko and Motoko, and this swap of history was reflected in the lore books as well, as all actual historical records in Planarcadia claimed that Himeko actually died 15 years ago. And do you know what else is stranger? Even though the people on Planarcadia had the historical record that Himeko died 15 years ago, they never questioned Himeko's existence in the ultra-popular Fluffy comic as being fake. So in short, the entire planet got fictionologists into believing that Himeko was dead and alive at the same time. Thus, we have Sparkle's comment about the cat box in 4.0. And mind you, this was good enough of a lie that it even tricked Asat Pramad, who was both a Lord Ravager and an old mask of Aha himself. Interestingly enough, even though Himeko immediately thought of Hiro, the nice one who disappeared, there was a case much closer to hers and Motoko in the history of the Graphia family. It was Nephia, who made a deal with a devil clad in black. When she fell gravely ill, those who had benefited from her generosity came rushing to repay her kindness. But none could break the weathering curse afflicting the Graphias until a devil clad in black brought her away to survive, offer up the lives of others, and her illness, would be cured. Seeing her own wretched reflection in the mirror, Nephia was tempted by the devil. She painted forth monsters of the Cinder Thage, leaving corpses strewn wherever she went. Beneath the night sky illuminated by flames, Nephia sat poised upon the back of an unspeakable monstrosity, her features serene and beautiful, showing no signs of the curse that threatened to fracture her. Her father rallied numerous artists and Imagini to strike her down, ultimately meeting his end along with her. The upheaval of Nephia brought disgrace upon her family, and countless historical records and legacies were destroyed in an instant. So in other words, much like Motoko, Nephia made a deal with someone who is not really Aha to break the curse, and the method that Devil Clad in Black offered was the same as that of the Shadow of the Moon, to swap history with others. As a result of this swap, historical records were destroyed, much like how all the records on Planarcadia believed that Himeko died 15 years ago, while also simultaneously believing in Himeko the cat in the fluffy blue comic by the same culprit. And if you really think about it, her case was really much more like Nephia than Hiro, because Hiro died for real and didn't beat the curse at all, unlike Nephia who did. Of course, this Shadow of the Moon, or the Devil Clad in Black, cannot be Asat Pramad, because throughout the main quest, we can be certain that he genuinely didn't know anything about Himeko's secret 15 years ago. In fact, he was even tricked by the records into believing that Himeko actually died, and even angst about it for quite a while.
面白いな。あんたは想像以上に愉快なやつだ。誰もが神の手から何かを盗もうとする中、あんたはただ華々しい花火を打ち上げようとしたってことか。そして俺のマナ娘はそんな馬鹿げた提案を受け入れた。なんて心揺さぶる物語だ。15年前、幻月遊戯に参加するためにあの子は一体何を諦めたと思う？生きる可能性を捨て、星空に触れる夢を諦め、今にも壊れそうな体を引きずりながら、ただあんたと共に一度きりの狂乱に身を投じたんだ。
So yeah, the guy was genuinely angry there when he thought that Motoko asked his not actually daughter to die. Which means that he cannot be the devil who could offer the solution, and that devil is actually the same Shadow of the Moon, Nihilux, a facet of Aha who cheated the game to hijack the Elation for her cause, and at the same time, Mythos, the Aeon of Enigmata.
神話っていうのはつまり最古の虚構でしょ？神話の中でなら神は永遠に存在し続け、人々の願いに応え続けられる。この想像に満ちた世界にぴったりだと思わない？
Of course, now that Nihilux's true identity is clear, what also becomes much clearer is her goal in this Phantasmon game, which is basically the exact same as Ishtar. Instead of continuing to act as Mythos in the fake path of Enigmata, she wanted to hijack all the energy of this looping game to ascend as the Aeon of Beauty, the other possibility, fully that was blocked off by Cyrene's remembrance up until 3.7. And it is here that we can begin to see the true beauty of the journey too, for both the Elation and the Trailblaze.
それはちょっと難しいかも。君たちももう知ってると思うけど、メカ鎧は眼力で動く現像子でしょ？つまり普通のロボットみたいな複雑な内部機構があって動くわけじゃないんだよね。こういうロボットなんかを見ると、人はつい無意識にそれが考えたり動いたりしたらどんな風になるかなって想像しちゃうよね。そうやって人々が想像や期待を投影することで生まれた眼力がメカ鎧に、いや、君一人がそう信じただけじゃ動けるようになるには足りないかな。大きな現像子はそれだけ必要な眼力も膨大なんだ。この巨大メカ鎧に命を吹き込もうと思うなら、ありえないっていう思考の枷を外さなくちゃならない。そのためにはとてつもなく大きな願いを乗せた物語と、何にも縛られない自由な想像力が必要になる。ところが残念なことに、 現代人の思考は現実的になりすぎちゃったんだ。こんな大きなメカ鎧が一体どうやって動くんだとか、とんでもない重さなのにどうして立っていられるんだとか、そんな風に考えずにはいられない。そんな疑いの気持ちがほんの少しでも混ざってしまううちは、大地に立つ巨大メカ鎧なんて夢のまた夢ってこと。もしかすると文明があまり発達してない社会の方が現像師としての巨大メカ鎧は生まれやすかったのかもね。
According to Asat Pramad, Akivali once wanted to destroy the path system, effectively to return the universe to its original state that Nihilux talked about in front of the mecha. Shush actually also talks about the same topic, about a fool who can use magic because they don't know any better. Well, that fool is definitely us, and our journey is the fool's journey across the tarot deck, but at the same time, we are also the anthropomorphic hero's journey, as I have analyzed in 3.3 and confirmed by Amphoreus in 3.4. So naturally, as the first hero's journey in recorded history, Gilgamesh has appeared in the Fate collab to tell us of the connection between the Elation and the Trailblaze. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, after Enkidu died, Gilgamesh followed the sun on a journey to the underworld to find the herb of immortality. The herb was at the bottom of the sea, so Gilgamesh had to dive into the water to get it. Incidentally, the Gilgamesh in the collab event is a snapshot of Gilgamesh at this exact moment, as he was just diving into the sea and before he could get the herb. Thus, when the Enkidu Chimera found him, Gilgamesh was still lost in the sea, and during the event, he specifically talked about ignoring the herb for the journey. Just as well, because in the original myth, Gilgamesh proceeded to lose the herb to a snake. As a result, the snake gained immortality and learned to shed its skin, while Gilgamesh contented himself to human mortality and grief. In the Nasu version of the story, Gilgamesh laughed at the loss, realizing that the meaning of his hero's journey is exactly what he told Enkidu Chimera at the end of the event, a story beginning with nothing and ending up with nothing, and that is the true meaning of the Elation. At the end of the original myth, having lost the herb, Gilgamesh returned to his city once more and became a great king, eventually reuniting with Enkidu in the river once more upon his death. Of course, since Gilgamesh literally spelled it out in the collab event, his role in the collab is very much that of Aha in the same way Ishtar is a stand-in for Nihilux. His story and Asat Pramad's story about Aha's future are basically the same thing, including the abundance as the herb of immortality and the Oroboros as the snake that stole the herb. The difference is that Asat Pramad is critical of that story's ending and actively wants to change it by killing Aha first, while Gilgamesh believes that even if the journey ends up as nothing, the journey itself is still worth it. Naturally, Rin, who is on a fruitless journey of her own to save her world from global mana drain, agrees with this view, as Rin's most precious treasure that Ishtar tried to take away from her in the collab is also the journey itself. This a nod to how in the original myth, Gilgamesh's journey to the underworld was already deliberately parallel to that of Ishtar by the Sumerian and Akkadian poets. From the established lore of the Nasu verse, the first to fifth magic cannot save Earth from the mana drain ending. Actually, there is talk of a sixth that can act as the epilogue, but generally, since the magician that Rin studies under is the second, Zelrich, and his operation of parallel worlds, it means that Rin's journey by itself is also another journey that ends in nothing, much like Gilgamesh's journey in the original myth and Ishtar's effort in the collab. Actually, Archer did say something really ominous and claimed that this is Rin's final journey. So yeah, Rin, Ishtar, and Gilgamesh in the collab plot are effectively stand-ins for Akivali, Nihilux, and Aha respectively. The hero's journey of the Trailblaze itself is what gives the Elation its beauty, and even if the Trailblaze ends up as nothing, even if the ending is also the beginning, the Nameless will not regret setting on their hero's journey in the first place. Of course, while Gilgamesh offers a positive view of the Elation as the first hero's journey in recorded history, Asat Pramad offers the more critical view of the path through the lens of Nietzsche, as someone who has already seen the nihilism at the end. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche describes Epicurus hedonism as decadence. However, his definition of decadence is a bit different from our modern understanding of it. The instinctive hatred of reality is the outcome of an extreme susceptibility to pain and to irritation, which can no longer endure to be touched at all, because every sensation strikes too deep. The instinctive exclusion of all aversion, of all hostility, of all boundaries and distances in feeling, is the outcome of an extreme susceptibility to pain and to irritation, which regards all resistance, all compulsory resistance, as insufferable anguish. These are the two physiological realities upon which, and out of which the doctrine of salvation has grown. I call them a sublime further development of hedonism upon a thoroughly morbid soil. Epicureanism, the pagan theory of salvation, even though it possessed a large proportion of Greek vitality and nervous energy, remains the most closely related to the above. Epicurus was a typical decadent, and I was the first to recognize him as such, the terror of pain, even of infinitely slight pain. Such a state cannot possibly help culminating in a religion of love. In plain English, the two key features of decadence is its inherent rejection of reality and all negative possibilities. By rejecting reality and negative possibilities, decadence claims to be a religion of love and salvation, the Epicurean hedonism, but in reality, it's only lying to itself to fake that happiness and religion of love. Eventually, because decadence will close itself off from reality, it will end up as nihilism, which is reflected in Planarcadia's plot as the Elation world returning to the world in canvas, which, in truth, is just the Ether Sea, the other names of which are the Red Sea of Remembrances, the Sea of Quanta, the Dirac Sea, and the Sea of Nihility, literally. So while the Elation itself is Epicurean hedonism, as expressed in the collab through Gilgamesh, Asat Pramad's analysis of it is from Nietzsche's criticism of Epicurean hedonism as the decadence that will end up as the nihility. As the light cones have told us long ago, the deepest sorrow sheds no tears, just as ultimate joy and pain are one and the same. Of course, Poyo didn't stop there in building the philosophy of the Elation. They actually aligned Amphoreus and Planarcadia together for a near-perfect reproduction of tragedy's death in Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. As I have predicted way back in 3.2, Amphoreus was built on the theme of the birth and death of Greek tragedy as described by Nietzsche. Everyone was stuck in an eternal recurrence, quite literally. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche interpreted the two opposing forces in Greek tragedy as Dionysian suffering and Apollonian rationalism. Through the Dionysian suffering in the play, Greek tragedy allows people to affirm their joy, while Apollonian dreamland brings the beauty to the suffering. However, according to Nietzsche, as society progressed, Apollonian dreamlike beauty started to adopt logic to overtake the Dionysian tragedy, and this logic was brought about by Socrates and Euripides. This is the philosophical basis for Goethe's Faust, and both Faust and Nietzsche's analysis became the inspirations for the conflict between Romanticism and the Enlightenment in Amphoreus. And needless to say, the Greek tragedy represents the hero's journey, as confirmed by 3.4. So when Nietzsche writes reason kills the tragedy, it likely translates here in Star Rail as the erudition killing the trailblaze magic of the fool. Among the killers of tragedy, especially of note was Euripides, who in an attempt to save tragedy, created a comedy from the remains of tragedy, and Euripides should be Asat Pramad here. Hence, after Amphoreus, we got to Planarcadia, the Elation world. Of course, when that comedy turned into decadence and became nihilism in Planarcadia, reason has killed tragedy for good, and Socrates won. This should be the plot for Amphoreus' continuation, and Socrates is probably Rupert III here. Interestingly enough, both Lycurgus and Anaxagoras were mentioned by Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy too. Nietzsche called Anaxagoras, with his nous, the first sober person among nothing but drunken philosophers, while Lycurgus, the king of Edone, was identified as the opponent chasing Socrates to the depth of the ocean, in the same way he chased Dionysus to the depth of ocean in the original myths. In other words, Lycurgus is probably going to swap sides and take a stand against Socrates, the Rupert III and Amphoreus continuation. As an aside, Nietzsche claims that the Germanic epics took over the role of the new tragedy after the death of the old tragedy, so we will probably go to a Germanic world next to explore the revived concept of beauty. In any case, Now we can see very clearly why Planarcadia came right in between Amphoreus and its continuation, because it's the Attic comedy that inherits from old tragedy, but is to be killed by rationalism anyway. In other words, the true form of the Elation is Epicurean hedonism and its critics, Nietzsche's decadence. At the same time, in terms of a play, the Elation is acting out Euripides' Attic comedy, which was born from the death of tragedy, the death of the hero's journey, the death of Achilles. But in the end, if the journey is bound to start with nothing and end in nothing, how could the elation of the trailblaze regain its meaning after the death of Achilles? Well, Nietzsche's answer to the question was already given to us through Acheron and the Amphoreus experiment, the will to power in an eternal recurrence of the same. In Nietzsche's argument, the only way to find joy and ascertain fate in the eternal recurrence is to become the Übermensch, a free spirit who loves fate despite all the sufferings in the eternal recurrence, rising beyond good and evil. Outside of Amphoreus, Acheron is the other Übermensch, representing all aspects of the Übermensch as a concept as the anti-nihility emanator. Hence, it is no surprise that Acheron's nihility is not the final death for real but a new beginning, or the original reset point, in the eternal recurrence for Penacony in 3.8. In contrast to the Übermensch is the saint, who is a flawed human revered as divine by the society around them. By assuming an ascetic lifestyle, the saint relishes in their own suffering to purify themselves of their own sins. In the Amphoreus plot, the Übermensch figure described by Nietzsche is embodied by three different characters, Phainon, Cyrene, and us, which makes sense because all three are different flavors of the trailblaze on the endless and fruitless journey. Specifically, throughout the course of Amphoreus, both Phainon and Cyrene experienced character development, from the flawed humanity of the saint to become the life-affirming Übermensch for Amphoreus' eternal recurrence.
我听过这么一种说法，神性是无瑕的人性，而人性是有瑕的神性。翁法罗斯的孩子早就不相信神明了，比起喜欢恶作剧的他们，我肯定更相信他。 还有身为人的自己。
一別は食わない。たとえ神が滅んでも。人は終点にたどり着く。
In the twilight of the gods, science will progress, and the gods will fall. Decadence is fated to fall into the nihility, as tragedy and comedy are one and the same. In a hero's journey that starts with nothing and ends with nothing, the flawed humanity needs not the gods to save themselves, for the fool will continue on, in an incomplete eternal recurrence.
実に単純な妖獣よ。同じ緑同士。 あの者といい勝負だ。物語の果て、何も残らぬのが女児史の常。されどかようなる結末も王にとってはさじに過ぎぬ。不老不死の秘宝も生命の躍動も全て儚い幻想に過ぎん。人の両手では何一つつかめぬ。まさに一切皆空と言えよう。 これぞ旅の行き着く先にある唯一の収穫。一つの物語の終わりに、あらゆる物質的な均衡の果てに無から生まれたもの、皆無。